Hi, I'm Dr. Kent Chamberlain, and I recently served on a New Hampshire commission, a state commission, that was charged with investigating the potential health effects of 5G and wireless communication. We completed our report in November of 2020, and we came up with a report that was close to 400 pages long. So some of us thought that it might be a good idea to come up with a brief video to give you an overview of what it was that we went through in that commission and how we reached our conclusions. So that's what I want to get across today. I should point out that the commission, the final report, there were two reports. One was a majority report and the other was a minority report. Kind of the bottom line there for the majority is that we feel that there are health concerns associated with 5G, and that's why we came up with the recommendations that we came up with. And I'll show you what we came up, or how we came up with those conclusions in just a moment. I'll show you some of the data. So I'm only going to be reporting on the majority report and leave the reporting of the minority to somebody else if they choose to do so. In terms of what you want to hear at this point. I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the last thing in the world you want to hear is there's something else we need to be worried about. Well, yes, you do need to be concerned about 5G. Most of us weren't even aware of it. I wasn't aware of it before I served on the commission. I thought that the radiation from cell phones was totally benign. But now we're finding out that there are problems, but the good news is that there are things that we can do about it. And I'll address some of those things that we can do in when we come to our recommendations. So I'd like to talk now about the commission itself. So the commission was formed because some constituents of Representative Pat Abrami, he's a Republican, he's from Rockingham County, and some of his constituents wanted him to look at 5G. They were concerned that there was a rollout of the 5G communication. There was an increased number of cell towers, and so they wanted somebody to look at it. So Representative Abrami came up with legislation. It was House Bill 522, and that legislation called for the formation of the commission that I served on. So the legislation was passed. This was signed by the governor, and this was in July of 2020, and then July of 2019, and the commission started its work in the fall of 2019. The makeup of the commission was 13 members. It had quite a range of backgrounds that were relevant to what it is that we were going to be looking at. We had 2 state senators, 2 state representatives, with backgrounds that include physics, engineering, electromagnetics, epidemiology, biostatistics, occupational health, toxicology, medicine, public health, policy, business, and law. So we had all the skill sets necessary to do the type of investigation that we were asked to perform. In terms of what we did, we met 13 times and we heard from 9 recognized experts in the field of radiation and the effects of radiation. And all but one of those, and I'll mention that and more about that in a second, all but one of those experts acknowledged very much the potential health effects and the recognized health effects of exposure to cell phone type radiation. The one exception was the expert brought in by the cell phone industry, and he was the only paid person to present before our commission. So we met 13 times. We heard from these 9 experts, and then it was in July of 2020 that we formed a working group, and I was part of that working group, to actually come up with the final report. And in this case, because there was a majority report and a minority report, we came up with was the majority report. 10 of the members, so just in terms of ratio, I said that there were 13 people on the commission. 10 of us signed the majority report and 3 signed the minority report. I think there's a little statement that needs to be going in here, and that is, while we found that there are health concerns about exposure to 5G, all of us on the majority are advocates of technology. When I joined the commission, I was chair of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of New Hampshire. And I got to say, I had kind of a bias. I thought, oh yeah, this is going to be cut and dry. We're going to look and we're going to find that there's no evidence suggesting that there are problems. But that's not what we found. So all of us, I can say pretty confidently, were advocates, and we were a little bit surprised by what we found. And so we feel like we're just trying to be good citizens in raising the alarm that we should be paying attention to this potential risk to the health of our fellow citizens. What I want to show next are some of the articles, just examples of articles from refereed journals that caused us to come to the conclusions we came to. So I'm going to show you just a handful of them right now, but there are thousands. Yes, there are articles that show no problem, but there are so many that do show a problem associated with 5G radiation that we felt that it would be irresponsible not to raise the alarm. So what I'll be showing you are articles. I'm going to try to do this in such a way that it's not overly burdensome, but I'm going to show the title of the article. I'm going to show just a quote from the article, and then show you how to access that article if you want to find out more. So when I say refereed journal, I'm not talking about an opinion piece, or I'm not talking about something from a low-level journal. As a chair of a department, electrical engineering department, I'm well aware of how to determine whether or not a journal is legitimate or not. And there are illegitimate journals. You can tell it by impact factor, citation index, and you can look up to see who the references are, the people who do the reviewing, the reviewers are, and you can actually contact them. So there are a lot of things that you can do to find out if an article is legitimate, and we did that on a number of the articles like that were the ones I'm going to be showing you next. So I'm going to be providing information on the slide. I'll go through them pretty quickly, and if you want to stop the video so that you can get the information, because I may be going too fast for you to do that while I'm talking. But if you might want to do that on your own, because that is what convinced me, and I started this process before we started listening to the experts. And then when the experts came in, that simply reinforced what we are seeing in the refereed publications. So here we go. Here's the first one. The article, I'm not going to go through these in great detail, as I mentioned. Low-intensity microwave radiation-induced oxidative stress, inflammatory response, and DNA damage in rat brains. So they took rat brains and they exposed them to radiation or not to radiation, and those who were exposed experienced oxidative stress, DNA damage. So I have the quote from the article that you can see, and I show you. This is from the Journal of Neurotoxicology, and if you want to go look it up, you can, because all of the information is there. And by the way, I'm showing you a range of articles from around the world. It's not like simply one small fringe journal is the one, and a very small group of researchers are saying there's a problem with 5G. You're seeing researchers from all over the spectrum addressing a range of problems from all over the spectrum. And so this isn't just onesies and twosies that are raising the flag as we are. So here's the next one. Exposure to non-ionizing electromagnetic fields emitted from mobile phones induced DNA damage. The human ear canal, hair follicles. I mean, we have enough things interfering with our ears that we don't want to have something else getting it. This is GSM, alters gene expression in the morphology of human skin fibroblasts. Now, the reason this is particularly important is that the proponents of 5G say that because 5G operates at higher frequencies, you don't get as much penetration into the human body, which is correct. However, what's the largest organ on the body but the skin? So if you're getting radiation on the skin, and we now can see that it affects skin fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are what helps in the creation of new tissue. So obviously you don't want to interfere with that process. So to me, this represents an issue for 5G and the higher frequencies that are being advocated. This is one that involves mental health, and we've heard a lot of reports about this. Basically, that the EMFs, electromagnetic fields, produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. You can read the list here of the other things that are known to be affected by radiation. And here's a suggestion for you. If you or anybody in your household has problem with insomnia, you might try turning off, putting all your electronic devices in airplane mode and turning off your Wi-Fi router. A lot of people have reported having the insomnia go away after doing that. So give it a try. Sperm count. We know that we've had problems with, sperm count going on for 10, 15 years. It's been in decline. This is one potential explanation for that when you expose sperm or expose a male to EMF radiation, things like sperm count and motility are on the decline. This is so it infects the mothers, and this is what you see, that it affects the DNA damage in the cord blood. This is the umbilical cord and the placenta. So again, looking at the range of things that radiation can affect, and this is just another one. Here's one that had a particular impact on us, and that is that having a cell tower and the radiation produced by a cell tower impacts the growth of trees and vegetation. I mean, trees and vegetation? Who would have thought? So the fact that it can have an impact like that on trees and vegetation, which we think of being pretty, protected against things like radiation, it turns out not to be the case. And the same is true for insects. We know that there's been a decline. And what the article says is that certainly pesticides are an issue, and insecticides. But when you couple it with radiation exposure, it makes the impact even greater. So it's a contributory effect. So it does have an impact on our environment. So I think you can see the conclusions that we reached, or can get a sense of why we came to the conclusion that it's potentially harmful. And basically, cell phone radiation, including 5G and Wi-Fi, pose a significant threat to human health and the environment. So that's a conclusion we reached, and you can see why we reached that conclusion. The relative risk is not clear, and this is important. So we know there's a problem. It's been identified. There are a lot of articles suggesting it. But what we don't know is the relative risk. And this is important if we're going to do a cost-benefit analysis. In other words, are the benefits of 5G worth it? And here's an analogy. We know that there are a lot of traffic fatalities every year. And nowadays, it's about 35,000 per year. And we assume that's a risk that we're willing to take for the benefit of having access to cars. But by acknowledging the risks and understanding the risks, we've been able to do something about it. The fatality rate used to be about 45,000. So when you introduce things like airbags, good seat belts, roll bars in roll cages, you can bring the fatality and bring the injuries down. So that's why we think it's important for us to raise the flag and declare the potential for problems, so that we can, by acknowledging it, we can do something about it. And there are things that can be done, and I can talk briefly about that. The other conclusion we came to is that this is not a scientific issue, it's a political issue. Because you may be saying to yourself, if you're like most of us were when we were going through this process, we're saying, well, where are our regulatory agencies? What are they doing? Well, unfortunately, here's what we found out. And what I'm showing you the picture of right now is the cover for a report from Harvard. And I'll just read it to you, some of the things. In fact, even reading the title gives you some pretty good insights. How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. Wow. And that would explain why we're not having to deal with regulatory agencies. They're run by industry. I mean, I'll read this. Industry controls the FCC through a soup-to-nuts stranglehold that extends from its well-placed campaign spending in Congress through its control of the FCC's congressional oversight committees to its persistent agency lobbying. So this is what's going on. You would expect a group like the agency, or like the Federal Communications Commission, to see the same journal papers that we're looking at, declare that there's a problem, and then figure out how to address that problem. But that's not happening because we have the leadership of the FCC that's dominated somebody with more of the industry's interests in mind than those of the public. At least that's the conclusion that we drew. So our general recommendations, and I'll just try to give you an overview of what they mean. We want to seek independent evaluation of the FCC radiation guidelines. Right now, they're set very high. The only other country that has guidelines set as high as us is Japan. And many nations have much lower radiation thresholds. So we want to have our federal delegation, or federal senators, work to get something done to enact legislation that would cause a refresh or a relook at the standards that are currently set by the FCC. And by the way, it looks like we're getting traction. Legislation is being written in New Hampshire to bring that about. And also there's a lawsuit by the Environmental Health Trust to challenge the FCC, and it appears that that challenge is getting some traction. Another big recommendation for us is to alert the public. Like I say, I didn't know there was a problem with cell phones. Most people don't. They're totally unaware of it, and that seems to be by design. So we want to let people know, and let people know that there are things you can do. Properly holding your phone. New designs for cell phones to expose other parts of your body rather than your body, or to not expose it as much to that radiation. If the public is alerted, they're not going to let kids play with their cell phones. Kids are very susceptible to, are particularly susceptible to cell phone radiation because their skull's not as thick. So knowing this, I think that will change some behaviors, hopefully to the point where it'll lessen the risk that people are exposed to. We're going to, and we're encouraging the migration to wired networks or Wi-Fi, to Li-Fi networking. Some of you may not have heard of it. Wired, you're familiar with. You plug a wire into your computer. There's no electromagnetic or very low radiation exposure. So go back to wired. That's what we started with. That's how most of us connected to the internet early on. Then we went wireless. We're saying, no, let's go back to wired or use Li-Fi. Li-Fi uses light to get the signal across, and we are very protected against light because it's almost in the visible spectrum that we're talking about for Li-Fi. So we're recommending that when schools, libraries, public places, the public in general, that if you can migrate to wired or Li-Fi, you're very much going to limit your risks. And then another recommendation is perform actual measurements on cell towers. I was kind of naive coming into this. I just assumed that when you're going to build a radiating facility of any kind, remember my background is in electromagnetics, that you're going to make measurements to make sure that it complies with safety standards. Turns out that's not the case. The cell companies come in, or it's actually the installers come in, build the sites, turn them on, and that's what you got. So we're suggesting that the measurements do have to be taken. And then work to protect our environment. And this is not an insignificant thing. These towers are on, cell phones are on 24/7. And we really don't know how some of these things are going to respond, but we're just starting to get the evidence in that it does not respond very well. So in order to protect our environment, we just got to use precaution and figure out how to do it safely if we're going to do it. So this concludes my interview. Thank you for watching. I hope this information that I've presented has been helpful to you.